I just wanted to welcome everyone to our second of two housing policy meetings for the Salem project. We had another one earlier today at noon, but thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Eunice Kim. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager for the City of Salem. And with me tonight are a few of my colleagues. I'll let them introduce themselves: Bryce, Austin, Shelley, and Jessica.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks, Eunice. Bryce Bishop with the Planning Division.
Austin Ross, Long Range Planner.
Shelley Ahinger with the Urban Development Department, working with federal housing programs.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jessica Blakely, and I'm with City of Salem Housing Authority.
So you're going to hear from quite a few of us today who work with housing and work on housing, and hopefully answer any questions you have as we go. We're going to do some interactive polling, which is going to be new, and so we'll also walk you through that. Austin? Thanks. So today I'm going to give just a brief project overview to make sure we're all on the same page about what the Salem project is and where we are in the process. And then this meeting really is divided into three different sections. The first section is going to focus on what we're calling previously drafted policies. So these are policy ideas that we have heard and drafted based on all the input we got during the visioning phase of the process over the last year and a half. Then we're going to focus on new policy ideas, and these are ideas largely from other communities in Oregon that we have researched and want to check and see if they're right for Salem, and then your ideas, and we'll be open to questions kind of throughout. So just as a reminder, the Salem project is a multi-year project to update the comprehensive plan. This is really the plan that includes high-level goals, policies, and map that we'll use to guide future growth and development in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So it's very high level, but it's really going to impact as we grow. So this is a map that's hopefully familiar to you all. The map shows the black dashed line, which is the city limits, and then the gray area, which includes unincorporated portions of Marion and Polk County. And this gray area is our portion of the urban growth boundary, and that's the area that our comprehensive plan governs. So if you hear people talking about 60,000 more people that we'll see by 2035, it's this gray area that they're referring to. And so we've seen a lot of development throughout the community in recent years, in recent months. And so this is really our opportunity to plan for that growth. So where are we? We started the Salem project several years ago, and we reached a major milestone earlier just last month, where we brought the vision document to the council and asked for acceptance. That vision document really included, again, high-level goals and a map, really the framework that we want to use to guide our future growth and development. And so City Council accepted that vision and basically gave us direction to continue working on the project, start working on the details of zoning, zoning code, zoning map, and policies. And so today, where we're going to be focusing on policies. So this is where we are in our weekly policy meeting schedule. This is the second week that we've been doing this. We talked about community engagement and equity last week, and we're on housing today. If you're interested in other topics like transportation and parks, feel free to come back. Every Wednesday we'll be here. We're going to be meeting at 12 and at 5:30. Each of those meetings are going to be the same material, so you can pick the time that kind of works best for you. So the three sections that I talked about earlier, we're going to walk through a presentation in terms of what those ideas are and maybe examples of those ideas. And then we're going to do some live polling to get your input. Do you like them? Do you have questions? Do you not like them? And then you can also ask questions. So we're going to do an example of the live polling because it is, again, something new that we're using. So I'm going to put in the chat the ways that you can participate in the live polling, and you can see it online here as well. But there's a link. It's pollev.com/EuniceKim347. You can put that into a browser in your computer or on your phone, and that will take you to this live polling, and it'll say, welcome, you're going to participate in it. You can also text EuniceKim347 to the number 22333. And so instead of texting it to a phone number of someone you might know, you're texting it to that number, and that should welcome you as well. And as we go, we will bring up a question, and then you'll have an opportunity to put in your answer. And you can change your answer but the questions will change automatically as we move through the process. So don't feel like you need to like refresh your screen or try to advance to the next slide. It should do that automatically. But because it's new, we're going to do a test. And the test questions, are you ready to do live polling? So if everyone can try it out on their web browser or their phone, that'd be great. And I think we have a smaller crowd today. So
I
Austin,
think
will
your
you?
magic number is 11 this time.
Magic number, thank you. So we're going to make sure that we everyone's able to do it. If it's not working, feel free to drop a question in the chat, or you can also just speak up. It's again a small crowd.
Eunice, I think we just had one more person join.
Okay, yeah. So I will drop the instructions again in the chat. So we're just practicing our live polling. If you just joined us, and so here's a link in the chat. If you click on it, you can join this presentation, and it will ask this question. I'm ready to do live polling. So you can select it there, or you can use your phone. Is it working for everybody? So we're missing one or two people maybe that it's not working for. Feel free to unmute if you're have a question. Oh, the text, you text to 22333. So it's not a full phone number, it's just those 5 numbers that you would text my name, Eunice Kim 347 in the text, and it should welcome you. It should text you back. Did it work, Roz?
Okay, I think we're operational.
Great. Roz, is it working for you? Nate, is there any way you can mute? I think I'm getting feedback from my own voice.
I'm trying to shut this.
Thank you. So maybe we'll go on to the next slide, and then if you're still having trouble, let us know, and we'll pause again at the first polling question. So today's meeting is all about housing, and I wanted to just remind folks that this is a vision statement that we brought to the council in the vision document last month. And it's really kind of the aspirational, what do we want Salem to be in the future as we grow and develop? And it does specifically call out access to affordable housing. This is a priority that we've heard throughout the community in all avenues of our outreach. And so just as a reminder that it is there in our vision statement. We also have goals. Oh, so there's a lot of planning efforts going on. Thanks, Austin. Related to housing. And so these are just a few of the examples. One of the real kind of basis for updating our comprehensive plan is our housing needs analysis. It was completed several years ago, but that's the document that really looks at what is our population growth, what's our demographics, how much land do we have enough land, and can we use it in the ways that are needed? So is it designated for multifamily or single family? The Climate Action Plan is a project that's happening right now, and we're collaborating very closely with that work. And it has also strategies or draft strategies related to housing. And last but not least, the city's strategic plan was just adopted by the council last month as well. And it has a priority specific to homelessness, which of course is related to housing. And so we'll touch on that as well. So this is just a very high level review of the goals that you've probably seen if you're familiar with our vision document. There are housing goals that are big and broad on purpose. And so there's a goal here on housing choice, and that's really about variety of housing, on land supply, which I spoke about earlier, housing affordability, complete neighborhoods, and livability and sustainability. So these again are very high level, and the goal of today's meeting and our outreach this spring really is to dive into the details of what do we mean by each of those. When we talk about housing affordability, what do we mean? What do we want to do when it comes to land supply, when it comes to housing choice? So as I turn it over to Austin, he's going to give some examples now of some of those details, and hopefully some of them will look familiar to you. Austin?
Thanks, Eunice. So we're gonna go over some previously drafted policies. These policies were presented in the vision that council accepted recently as Appendix A. And these ideas come from outreach that we've done in previous phases of the project. So these are ideas we heard from the community, and we wanted to make sure we got them down on paper before we went any further. So it's important to remember that as we go through these policies, we're not trying to wordsmith, we're just testing the ideas. Even from the vision document, we had to summarize these ideas to some extent so that they would fit into the presentation. Just make sure that we're asking you whether or not you like these ideas and not the wording. It's also important to remember that this is a small sample of the total number of policies that we've drafted. So you are welcome to check out the full list on the project's website. They're all there for you to review. But these are some of the ones that we really wanted to test with the public and just get confirmation that this is the right direction to go. And as we're going through these live polling questions and these previously drafted policies, if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. So I already see a question. What day or date would I comment on land use and zoning? So we will have some ways to give feedback on zoning coming up in the future. Right now we're on housing, but stay tuned. So as we get into this first set of previously drafted policies, these ones are all related to housing choice, that housing choice goal that Eunice showed earlier. So the one about housing types is about encouraging a variety of housing throughout Salem. So right now we have some areas that are just single family housing. And so this policy gets at a mix of housing types, whether that's duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, multifamily housing spread around Salem. The next one about innovation is about encouraging new housing types or housing types that we don't see a lot of in Salem right now. So that includes cottage cluster housing, single room occupancy, even to some extent townhomes, things like that, that can fill in gaps in the housing stock that we have right now. The adaptability policy is about providing the regulatory flexibility to enable some existing homes to convert to middle housing. And when I say middle housing, I'm talking about duplexes, triplexes, those sorts of things, and making sure that we're allowing existing homes to convert if that's what people want to do. The accessibility and aging in place policy is about encouraging housing that allows our older population or people living with disabilities to be able to stay in their homes, to be independent, and making sure that they're not getting priced out of the housing that they're currently in. So we'll jump to the live polling question, and we're asking you to choose the policies that you agree with. So you can vote for multiple policies here or all of them if you choose. But we're just sharing the ones that you like, please. If anybody's still having issues getting that live polling to come up, please let us know in the chat and we will do our very best to troubleshoot for you. So I'm seeing a question in the chat that says, seems like A, B, and C aren't really options for us as a city with respect to House Bill 2001. Eunice?
Sure. So House Bill 2001, for you that aren't familiar, is the law that passed, I think, 2 years ago that mandates that cities allow duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters in single family zones. And so we are working on that code project separate of this, and I can explain that if there's more questions. And so while we are you're correct in that we have to allow those. There's other types of housing that we could allow. And there's also ways to incentivize. So not just to allow them, but to incentivize them in terms of development. Does that answer your question? Great.
All right, so it looks like most people, almost everybody has weighed in on this. So we're going to jump to the next set of policies. Oh, looks like we have one more question in there, Eunice. How are we going to account for new housing demands for larger apartments to account for work at home? Currently, Portland has open smaller apartments and offering free rent for a month.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Let me unmute, Eunice.
Hi, Steve.
Real quick, the housing market is changing.
Yes.
Since the pandemic, people are looking for different apartment styles, larger apartments, more space so they can work at home and not feel closed in,
Okay.
and access to amenities within like pocket parks and things like that.
Yes.
Portland has an extreme open market now of apartments. A lot of them on the market. They are offering free month for a rent, 6 weeks up when you renewal. So they're trying to attract people into the existing apartment base. And so I'm just wondering if we're looking ahead for Salem, do we have anything in this policy statement that allows us to encourage or ask to develop? Because more of our people that are going to be living in apartments may be work from home people and want to do that instead of, single, like you talked about, single family homes or small studio apartments. That marketplace may be going away. So I'm just going, where does it fit?
So how are we incentivizing maybe like additional amenities in apartments so that those apartments better accommodate folks who want to work from home?
Yeah, like 3 bedrooms and a studio or an office or things like that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if we really get into number of units number of bedrooms in our zoning code. I can see ways of potentially incentivizing community amenities, which similar to what we do with community spaces, open spaces at larger multifamily projects. But I'll think about that. When the market demands such things such as this, yes, I think that's a good point that the market will shift. I would anticipate to what the demand is, but to the extent that we could incentivize things, perhaps.
All right, so the next set of policies is about housing choice and land supply. So the first one is about housing diversity, and that's encouraging a variety of housing types within new developments. So a lot of times we'll see a new subdivision that's full of single family homes, but maybe we could do something that would encourage or incentivize developers to include some duplexes or townhomes or triplexes within a new development like that, and vice versa, where sometimes we would see a large multifamily housing development, maybe there could be a mix of housing types within that. The policy about access and dispersal is about having multifamily housing near services, amenities, jobs. So thinking about where we locate our multifamily housing and making sure that there's access to those things that they need to have a walkable community, but also to access to transit and things like that. The affordable housing dispersal is about encouraging housing throughout Salem to promote more mixed income neighborhoods. So similar to the housing diversity, where we want to see a mix of housing types, we want to see potentially housing that promotes a mix of incomes or people with a mix of incomes living together in one neighborhood. And then that infill policy is about efficient use of land and using the infrastructure we already have. So finding ways to promote infill development rather than developing in areas on the edges of Salem that haven't been developed yet. So we'll jump over to the live poll, and again, we're choosing the ones we agree with.
So while folks are voting, it looks like there's a question about city-owned or publicly owned low-income housing, and maybe I'll ask Jessica if she wants to weigh in. I know that the Housing Authority is working hard on all different types of housing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
Thank you.
So we have an existing pipeline right now of affordable housing developments, which are in queue and in pre-development. And so we work on maybe 1 to 2 to 3 projects at any given time for our staffing capacity over at the Housing Authority. But we also meet with private developers and try to work on public-private partnerships because there are a lot of developers out there that can build a lot faster because we have a lot of regulatory things that we have to follow in order to build those affordable units. So we have Yaquina Hall, which is slated to start construction this winter, and it will last about 12 to 14 months. And it is geared towards those who are chronically homeless and have serious and persistent mental illness. Those are smaller 1-bedroom units. There'll be 52. And then we're also currently working on Sequoia Crossings, which is located in North Salem in the Highland neighborhood. And that one used to be an affordable housing development, which was demolished in 2009. And we have that land in our inventory already, and we're starting those pre-development and funding requests for 60 units of permanent supportive housing. So these housing models are geared towards those with higher needs and come with potentially might need some case management on site. And those are 2 of the projects that we have existing. We also have a partnership with Claxter Crossings out on Portland Road. And that's it for right now, but we're in conversation for a couple more. So a lot of private developers will ask for project-based vouchers, which the Housing Authority has, and we can incorporate those into their development, which that's another 2. There's 2 additional developments in queue for those. So we try to keep a consistent pipeline of affordable housing, bringing those to market as quickly as possible. Our affordable housing developments are usually geared towards those in the extremely low income, which is 30% of area median income, or potentially 50 and 60%. But affordable housing can technically be defined anywhere 80% or below. Did that answer all those questions?
Thank you.
Yes, my pleasure.
There's another question about expanding the urban growth boundary. So when we did our studies on the housing needs analysis and the economic opportunities analysis, those are really the 2 studies that look at, do we have enough land in the next 20 years to meet our needs for housing and jobs? And so based on those, we don't need to expand our urban growth boundary. And so we don't have any plans to do so in the near future. That doesn't mean we can't go back and look at and redo those studies in the future to see if those projections, for example, have changed. There's a question about eliminating parking requirements. Oh, sorry. Another question came up before I had a chance to read it. Would remove a big hurdle for developers and help make cities more walkable. I guess not a question, it's a comment. Oh, Jessica, you want to take the next one? Wait list?
Yes, absolutely. We know the need is extremely high in Salem, and actually we've had to close several of our waiting lists because we didn't want to provide any false hope. Most of our waiting lists exceed 5 years, and so many of those lists have closed. We only have a small number of lists which are open at this time, and so we just need more supply so we can have the ability to provide vouchers and open those lists back up.
There's also a lot of good comments in the chat, and so we will be using that information. I appreciate those comments. There's a question from Steve about our comments on affordable housing not squaring with elected officials being quoted as mixed use as affordable housing. How do we square this? Can you clarify that comment?
Yeah, real quick, and I'll just use one example. The mayor was quoted in the Statesman Journal as saying that he saw mixed use as affordable housing solution for Salem. And yet we're talking here that we've got a voucher-based system, and it looks like, you know, that's a good system. We're doing a lot of good work with that. So where does that fit in the zoning code? Because that, if you look at the market price or the price per square foot to build housing in Salem right now, you know, mixed use is not affordable housing. And, you know, there's a big regulatory overhead. And so how do we get these affordable housing projects squared in the Salem program? Because I think there's benefit to have them in different parts of the community. And I look at West Salem, there's some low income areas where those would be very helpful. But if you just say mixed use, I mean, there's this idea from our elected officials that their definition of affordable housing is mixed use, or they're being quoted to that, and it just doesn't seem to align with what we're trying to accomplish here. So that was just the question in terms of, I think, do we have a special zone for affordable housing? You know, how do we incorporate it into our Salem so we look forward, and as we grow over the next 20 years, we don't lose that concept. And somebody says I can make $30 or $40 more per square foot if I build this kind of housing, and I'm not going to do that. You know, how do we program that in? I don't know the answer to that, but I just think that there's a disconnect between what the elected officials are saying to the media and what we're hearing here.
Sure, I appreciate that clarification, Steve. You know, I don't want to speak for the mayor, but I do think that we can, through our policies, you know, say that we want to encourage affordable housing, and we can encourage it broadly throughout the community. I think that's something that we've heard pretty loud and clear. And I think in terms of mixed use, one of our, I think, strategies for having enough space for housing, including multifamily housing, is to open up where housing can go, whether it's affordable or not, multifamily. And so mixed use along our corridors, for example, which is something we've talked a lot about, is one of those ways. So to make it easier to build housing in locations that are near services, near transit, near jobs is something that we're working on. But I don't want to speak for the mayor. Jessica, did you want to add?
No, you don't have to speak for the mayor. I mean, this is what I'm seeing. I mean, is there a special designation that we can have within our program that says that within this certain area that we want to encourage affordable housing? You know, I mean, how does that get into the process? Because we have certain zoning rules and stuff like that. But so how do we encourage the projects that we were talking about that we're seeing going on in our city that right now are very positive, but they're limited to funds, vouchers, and that stuff? So is there a way that we can say, as we look at our community, that we want affordable housing within this radius of a certain, you know, shopping center or something like that? I mean, I don't know. Is that too much of detail that, you know, because it could get lost in time if it's just one zone, mixed use or townhome kind of zones?
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to that as far as maybe our broader goals in working with maybe private developers in the area is that we don't want, and when I say we, I mean the Public Housing Authority working in line with HUD, there are a lot of policies about deconcentration of poverty. And so we try not to center affordable housing in just any one given area. We want to see it all over the community. And so identifying some of the areas where we have a lack of affordable housing and we want to target, those are sometimes when we'll meet with some developers and see if there's a program that the Housing Authority has that we can help with. For example, our tax exemption program, where private developers who maybe have market rate programs can self-restrict their own units. And in turn, we work with them in a partnership to offset some of their property taxes. And so there are a lot of little pockets of programs that we like to encourage that development, because we know that some of the conventional housing developers can build faster than say the Housing Authority. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but hopefully that helps.
Well, no, that's very helpful. I mean, just the question to Eunice is there some way we can place this on our map so that we identify areas where we'd like to see that happen in the future. And I don't know if that's just a note or a zone. It's not a specific zone, is it, Eunice? So I mean, I think, how do we capture this idea that we want this to happen in the future, and then let the housing authority go to work on it, but just say these are areas or pockets where we'd like to see this across the city.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comments. And we don't say that in one area you can do housing only if it's affordable, but or you can't do it if it is affordable, right? We do it by use. Is it single family, two family, multifamily? So I'm not sure we would do that. We can incentivize housing, and we have done so by reducing parking requirements, for example, for affordable housing. And there's a lot of work going on at the state level right now to make it easier to build affordable housing in communities. So I think we'll see that as well. Austin, do you want to move on?
Sure, yeah. So next set of questions are about housing affordability. And the first policy is low income and workforce housing. So that's just encouraging development of affordable housing, whether it's subsidized or not. We would love to see, or this policy would be encouraging more affordable housing broadly across the city and looking at ways to incentivize that. Regulations and incentives. This policy is about making sure that our development standards and our fees aren't an impediment to developing affordable housing. So ensuring that we're doing as much as we can as a city to facilitate that development process. The shelter and services coordination policy is about the city working with its partners to ensure that all our efforts are aligned and working well together so that people who are currently unsheltered or at risk of losing housing have a coordinated support network. And then the anti-displacement policy is about ensuring long-term affordability of housing. So making sure that we are limiting any involuntary displacement because of increases in rents or increases in housing costs generally, but also working with communities who might be at risk of that displacement to empower them to influence decision-making. So those policies are the next set that we're going to vote on, and you guys can go ahead. All right, so it looks like most people have been able to vote there. Glad to see that. It looks like we have one question in the chat. It says, in regards to anti-displacement, is this including gentrification / out-of-state ownership? I know buying a home right now is very difficult with, say, an FHA loan with all the cash buyers out there. Eunice, do you want to speak to that, or someone else? Jessica?
Shelley, do you think, or Jessica? I'm not as familiar with FHA loans.
FHA just guarantees loans, so they don't really give the money. It actually is the bank that you would still have to qualify for. I do agree there are a lot of cash buyers out there right now, but there are some first-time homebuyer programs that are being administered by Dev Northwest and some of our other partners. We also had an application recently submitted by the same organization, Dev Northwest, to do some single-family home ownership, do a single-family home ownership, I guess, community, first-time home buyers. And I know that Habitat for Humanity has a couple of those developments also in the city. And I know that they're always looking for opportunities to assist with affordable housing. What we have found through our programs is that since 2009, and you had the housing crash, there was just such a large foreclosure that at this particular time, if your credit's not at its best and you're not able to put some money down, it is very difficult for you to get into homeownership. But we do have some other housing programs out there.
And I think to that question, maybe more generally, gentrification is one of the factors behind this policy, and understanding that some places have become less affordable over time. And so working with residents to understand their needs and their priorities as related to that housing cost. Yes, that is a consideration. It looks like there are some comments about rent controls. So, for people who are adding comments to the chat, that's awesome. We're keeping notes and we'll be sure to take into consideration the thoughts that you're sharing in there. It looks like somebody's asking for a little bit more clarification on what affordable housing is. So I think in terms of these policies, we're talking pretty broadly about affordable housing. So whether that is subsidized or controlled based on area median income, or whether it's just, I guess, what we would call naturally occurring affordable housing. So that's market rate housing that's still affordable to residents of all income levels, or whether it is, this comment, someone mentions Section 8 vouchers and that sort of thing. So I think all of that's included. But Eunice, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think this is really an opportunity to have policies around each specific, right? So we can have a policy on naturally occurring kind of market rate. We can have policies on subsidized. We can have policies on workforce housing. And so we're not trying to limit kind of the discussion on affordable housing.
Yeah, and I can add one thing. In the chat, I put a link to Oregon Housing and Community Services rent and income limits. And that kind of explains at the different percentages what those rents might look like. And so when we talk about affordability, it's not necessarily a voucher program or anything like that. Like Austin was saying, it could be someone that just chooses to keep their rents at an affordable level. If you accept Section 8 vouchers and you have Section 8 vouchers at your property, most likely you would be considered affordable because you meet the fair market rents for our area. And so that would be another test. But for reference, I posted that in the chat so you could look at this year's current income and rent limits.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We also have a question about incentivizing a co-op type mobile home park, where the people who live there all own the park. That's a great idea. And I do think we have a policy, though not in this presentation, that does refer to mobile home parks.
And we do have a policy question coming up related to ownership and innovation in terms of types of ownership and incentivizing it. So we'll get there.
We have another comment that says, due to low inventory of houses for sale, sellers tend to want no contingencies, hence they select the cash buyers. So I think that's a response to maybe some concerns about gentrification. So thanks for that. Let's move on to the next one. This set of policies is about complete neighborhoods, livability, and sustainability. So the first one is about making sure that we're developing our high density housing or more multifamily housing close to transit networks, especially frequent transit like the Chariot's Core network. The mixed use policy is about promoting housing in mixed use areas. to promote more complete neighborhoods. So right now, a lot of the areas that we're proposing to change to mixed use have a lot of commercial development. So this would be looking at ways to incentivize adding more housing to those areas. Amenities in large multifamily projects, encouraging people to, developers to incorporate open space, community spaces, community gardens, meeting spaces, amenities like that. And then the last one is about encouraging green building. So whether that's building more energy efficient buildings or something passive like that, or actively green buildings, for example, that had solar panels on them. So all kinds of green building. So let's get the poll on that one and go ahead and vote. Seeing the numbers still moving around a little bit, we'll give people another minute or two here. All righty, let's keep moving. So that was our review of previously drafted policies. I want to give people a chance to ask any other questions or share any other comments that they might have about those policies before we move on to some new ideas. So feel free to either drop questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll give people one moment for that. And we also will have some time for question and answer at the very end. So if a question pops into your head after we move on, that is all right as well. So we have a question that says, do all parts of Salem have to have complete neighborhoods? Can communities reject complete neighborhoods? And how many complete neighborhoods are needed for Salem? So I think currently, not all parts of Salem are complete neighborhoods. We use some measures about people's access to services, shopping, amenities, things like schools, to calculate walkability. And it's not just one neighborhood as a chunk and is that neighborhood complete? It's more just looking at different areas and what they have access to, and whether we can make some areas a little bit more complete than they are now. So I think it's more of an incremental concept. Eunice? Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think we've heard pretty broad support for making a more walkable Salem and more walkable complete neighborhoods across the community. This also gets to the council's greenhouse gas emissions reductions goal of carbon neutral by 2050. And so access to services and be able to get somewhere by bike or foot or transit, I think aligns with that goal as well.
Eunice, we have another question that says, how does the city balance conflicting policies like asking for more amenities for multifamily housing versus more affordable multifamily housing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think at this point, what we're trying to do is really set the policies broadly. And I think that it doesn't have to be a direct conflict, right? So we can say there are different things that we could do. We could incentivize, for example, folks to have amenities and then say, if you provide these amenities, which we do for example, active recreational space or active common open space, I can't remember the phrasing in it, in our new multifamily design standards, you can then provide less less overall open space. And so we're saying you can have this amenity, but then we give you more space to then do housing, for example. And so I think generally, yes, there's going to be points where there could be a tension, and those are constant, I think, policy decisions and decisions as we implement this that we'll be addressing as we go.
We have another question from Steve that says, can this complete neighborhood be enhanced by access to transit? How is and will it be tied to council greenhouse gas reduction plans? I think that's a great point. Definitely complete neighborhoods go along with transit, and having access to transit in and services and tying that to more walkable neighborhoods definitely works towards accomplishing council's greenhouse gas reduction goals.
And I'm not sure, there's another question about city-owned property and have we done an inventory? Shelley or Jessica, are you familiar if we've done one?
Yes, we do have an inventory, and it is maintained by the Urban Development Department, but the city doesn't really have any inventory at this particular time. I can tell you that the most recent parcel that was purchased was the Arches building and the land there and the land where the new shelter is going on Portland Road, but the city does not land bank property. That's just not part of the overall policy at this time.
Thanks, Shelley. So I'm going to turn it over to Bryce now, and he's going to talk us through some of the new policy ideas that we're considering.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. So like Austin said, we went through the previous, policies, but now we have these 9 new policies that are related to housing that we've identified, from other cities. And in looking at those comprehensive plans of other cities, we feel that these policies are contenders, and are worthy for, consideration possibly in the city's comp plan. So as we go through these, I'll just provide a brief overview of them, and then we will have a polling, question afterwards where you can decide whether or not this is a good policy for the city, if it's not a good policy for the city, or if you're unsure. So the first policy that we have is a policy related to housing quality. And this, is a policy that we don't really have in the comprehensive plan. We do have, several policies in the comprehensive plan that deal with housing quality, but this one would be, specifically recognized, in the comp plan and encourage housing that provides, good air quality, access to light in the outdoors, and is free of hazards. And so, the city does a lot of this stuff already through the zoning code, for instance, in terms of access to light, air in the outdoors. We do have, maximum lot coverage requirements in our zones. Many of our zones, especially our residential zones, and setback requirements that get at having space on your property for, open space in the outdoors. And then there are requirements, for, building permit review that deal with, building design for safety. And then in terms of, hazards, we do have, standards in our community enforcement, sections of the code that deal with, what is how, what's a health hazard, what's a problem, and we do have, multifamily housing, licensing program in the city that requires inspections for multifamily developments to ensure that, that the housing that's being provided is safe, and it is, a safe place to call home. So going on to the voting here. So do you think having a policy about housing quality in Salem is right for the city? And if you have questions about it, if you're unsure, what that means, just feel free to put those in the chat. And then one of us can do our best to answer those. So there's a comment about, seems like habitability standards are already pretty spendy, but they're a necessity, I would argue. And affordable safe housing is a is an important thing for the city to have. And it's kind of sad that our comprehensive plan doesn't have a policy about housing safety. And but certainly it would be a benefit. All right, so moving on to the next one. So housing safety, this is very similar to the housing quality requirement. And a lot of this is covered by state and federal regulations in terms of materials that are allowed to be used in new construction, such as lead and asbestos and radon gas. How do you deal with that? But should the city have a policy that deals with requiring safe and healthy housing that's free of hazardous materials?
Bryce, this is Steve Anderson. Quick question. Does that include the sampling of soils, or are you talking about just housing materials only?
I think it's, it would be, a more holistic approach, not just the materials. We want, the home site to be safe as well. So not only, the home where you're residing inside, is that safe and, secure and healthy? And also is the ground that you're on, safe, healthy and free from hazards, so if you have kids playing out in the backyard, you don't want, kids or people playing, or being in contact with contaminated soil. So yes, it would be probably all of those things.
Well, I asked the question because DEQ has currently a policy of if you're transforming agricultural lands into schools or residential areas, they have to be sampled or site assessment is required. And currently the city of Salem is not doing that and has not done it. So I'm just going, if there is existing rules and regulations on the books, how does this get enforced? And the city currently does not follow the current state law.
Well, those state standards that you're referencing are, DEQ requirements, and under the and under the jurisdiction for, I've been associated with subdivisions and, that I've processed and, where there have been contaminated soils that have been left over from, former orchards. And, in order to close on the property and to, use it, they've had to go through, remediation, removal of the contaminated soil and disposal, off site, so, and that's all been processed through DEQ. I guess it kind of comes down to, and I, defer this to Eunice, it's some of these are, enforcement and, who has jurisdiction, who's better apt to do this. But, certainly, having a policy about, encouraging that and would be, in my opinion, a step in the right direction. Eunice, do you have anything to add?
Well, just a quick comment before Eunice jumps in. I mean, I think the question here is in terms of making this happen, because there is a generic code within the Salem revised code that says there has to be a designation by the planning department that this does not adversely affect the adjacent property or the current property. And that covers all of the state and federal rules, which are not being evaluated. And that's probably outside this conversation. But back to what you're saying, Bryce, I would say, and just as a note here from the audience, that safety is an important part of what we want in terms of livability. But I think there needs to be a overhaul in how the planning process implements that, because currently it's on the books, but it's not being followed. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you for the comment. Okay, so on to the next one. So, having a policy that deals with healthy and active living, so this one would encourage, housing to provide, open space and active recreational areas, or, facilities, for, growing your own food, such as community gardens, and the idea that, we want to promote, an active and healthy lifestyle for all the residents within the city, and, going through, encouraging that, and maybe it's establishing certain requirements or incentives to do that in in certain types of development, or in subdivisions, having a community garden on a common open space tract in the subdivision, or requiring, as the policy is showing here, a kitchen area in a community kitchen area in a multifamily development. Those are all ways for folks to be able to have healthy food, active lifestyle. And then that kind of also ties into having complete neighborhoods and communities where those services are safe and walkable, so everything kind of fits together. So is having a policy dealing with healthy and active living a right policy for Salem? Okay, so the next one is responding, that's policy dealing with responding to social isolation. And this would encourage site designs that reduce social isolation for groups most likely to experience it. And from our outreach with the community, it's, the population that is really susceptible to social isolation are the senior community. And so that this policy could encourage ideas such as, cottage cluster developments where you have small homes oriented on a lot with common open space facing each other, so you can have that sense of community and interaction. And there could also be approaches such as intergenerational housing where you have people from all age groups living in a residential development. So it's more inclusive, and there's exposure to everybody in the entire range of this and the spectrum of life. So is that a good policy for the city?
And there's a comment in the chat about pocket parks promoting healthy and active living. And yeah, I think that's a good comment. And it's something that we actually are going to test an idea when we get to the Parks and Recreation policy meeting. So please join us.
Okay, I want to move on to the next one, Austin. So this policy deals with specialized housing, and it would deal with encouraging specialized housing to meet the diverse needs of the residents of the city, including the elderly, people with disabilities, students, and more. So this could include types of housing for people with disabilities, people with alcohol and drug dependence, residential care facilities, residential homes. Types of housing where there's some special need for care. And currently right now, if you look at a lot of our residential zones, there can be perceived barriers to that through the zoning process in terms of having to get a conditional use permit for certain types of these facilities, and then restrictions on having to be located on a certain type of street. So that could be a discouraging factor to establishing some of these types of needed specialized housing. So would a policy that encourages that be appropriate for the city? So there's a comment in there about encouraging ADA housing to be distributed throughout the neighborhoods, and that would be a great and fantastic goal that would be encouraged. And then another comment about when talking about policies, whether it would be an incentive versus requirement could greatly change responses. So Eunice, do you want to talk a little bit about these policies in terms of an incentive versus a mandate, a shall, or as opposed to a should or an encourage?
Yeah, so when we're talking about encouragement, generally we're talking about incentives, not mandates. We are going through the process, and we did this with the previously drafted policies of rewriting them to be very clear where we are intending to be a shall versus a should. So a mandate requirement versus an incentive. And we'll continue to do that to be clear. But in most cases, what these questions are, should we just encourage these things, incentivize these things, allow these things, as opposed to mandates?
Okay, the next policy is about density bonuses. So this would allow the opportunity for higher densities if a certain number of dedicated units are dedicated to affordable housing within the development. So, one thing that Eunice was talking about, it's mandate versus an incentive. This is an incentive that could be relatively easily achieved through the zoning code. We have different zones throughout the city, and which have different densities that are allowed in the multifamily zones, like the RM2 zone, which is our kind of our highest normal multifamily zone. The density is 28 dwelling units per acre. So if there was an opportunity to allow for an increase to that maximum 28 dwelling units per acre, if affordable units were provided, would that be an appropriate policy, to have, in the city? allowing increased density if affordable housing is allowed or included, I should say. And I would say too, if you look at if you're familiar with the zoning code, our code is, a lot of it is just based on, here's the standard, and we don't have a lot of, incentives built into it. So anywhere that we can, incentivize, things through, either changing of a density standard or, reducing a setback requirement or allowing for a higher height, slightly higher height, those are all ways that, we can encourage through the development code the types of development that we're wanting to see, including affordable housing throughout the city. And then the next policy here is about minimizing residential parking requirements. So should the city have a policy that evaluates the parking needs for different residential types of development and reduces them to the lowest feasible amount, to ensure that there's more urban land dedicated to people rather than parking. And in previous comments I've seen in the chat, there's and it seems like there's a consensus that having automobile centric development is kind of a challenge for Salem, and something that is expensive in a lot of, and has a lot of costs for the community. And if we can get to a point where we're developing valuable urban land within the UGB for people rather than vehicles, that would be a good policy. And there's on-street parking available here, and the city did take its first steps, big steps forward in terms of addressing parking with the recent multifamily amendments that Eunice had worked on that have now been adopted to eliminate the minimum off-street parking requirement for multifamily development that's located in the downtown core within what's called the Central Salem Development Program area, or if it's located within a quarter mile of the Salem Kaiser or Chariot's core network transit route. So that has been a big step forward and a good way to reduce, cost and the burden, for developers of multifamily and henceforth, and because of that too, affordable housing. So less parking costs can equate to more affordable housing. And then let's see. There's a comment about parking needs need to be tied to on-street parking as well as street widths and access to transit. Yeah, that's good. It is kind of all interrelated there.
I just wanted to also add that when we're talking about minimizing parking requirements, it's saying that as a city it would be what we require, not necessarily what the market could provide. So even in places where multifamily development, like Bryce was saying, doesn't need to buy our code to provide parking, the developers could determine that they actually want that parking there and build it to the market.
And the next policy deals with housing and transportation costs, and how housing is burdened by transportation costs. So the policy would encourage housing that decreases commuting times and distances and reduces transportation costs. So it's very related to what we discussed with other things here tonight: complete communities, having services nearby, having housing and affordable housing on your transit, so it's convenient and easily accessible, and therefore reducing the need to drive single occupancy vehicle trips to go to the store or to have dinner or to go to your job. So encouraging greater mix of uses in these neighborhoods close by, and these complete neighborhoods would help in that. And so is it appropriate to have a policy in the comprehensive plan that deals with that or encourages that?
Bryce, just a quick comment on this. I think more work needs to be done. there has been no discussion in here about the economic engine for Salem, which is basically government jobs, which are in the downtown core. And the city has developed over the last 20 years with a positive and a definite mode to put single family housing in South Salem and West Salem to preserve farm use land. And so this is a complete 180. And in addition, the issue that's coming out of the Climate Action Task Force that over 55% of people coming into Salem now for jobs is commuters. And so it seems like that the complete housing concept may or may not work, but the idea is maybe enforcing better transit. There may be sections of town, like if you want to go to a certain part of town to have a different kind of food. For example, urban development just attracted a creamery and cheese building plant as part of the redevelopment effort out on Portland Road, which has a Hispanic restaurant, which fits into that community. So maybe in Salem, Hispanic restaurants are concentrated in Portland Road. And so there's a diversity in town, or do we just want a one size fits all model? That's unclear. And I think this question here is not deep enough or robust enough to really get to some of these policies for Salem, because we have not addressed economics, where people go for jobs, where are there going to be jobs? Are we going to have a service-based economy, or are we going to have a manufacturing-based economy? And that's going to determine, and the decision to put industrial property out east of I-5 is already said that for a lot of people that want those kinds of jobs are going to be commuting. So I just think there's a little, I mean, this is a lot of words, but I just think this question is not robust enough to develop a policy statement at this time. And I'll just leave it there.
Okay, thanks for that comment, Steve.
I just wanted to address the comment also that Nate had put in the chat about the city mandating parking for commercial, it not making sense. And as part of the work that we're doing in our Salem on the zoning committee that I'll talk about in a little bit, one of the things that will be under consideration to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is whether or not the city wants to reduce parking requirements for other uses, if not all uses, in certain locations, particularly those that are along frequent transit service or routes. So I think the city is starting to talk about that. But we started, as Bryce was saying, really around multifamily housing. So the conversation is ongoing.
Thanks, Eunice. And then finally, the last policy here we have tonight is a policy about encouraging new forms of ownership other than just single family ownership of a single family home on a lot, the traditional form, in areas where you have multifamily type of, situations. So like in a multifamily development or a mobile home park that was mentioned earlier in the comments. Should the city have a policy that encourages, new and innovative types of home ownership models or approaches, to allow people to have a ladder up and begin to, have that home ownership opportunity that then has all sorts of benefits with it and, helps to strengthen the community. So should the city have a policy about increasing ownership, possibilities in, multi-unit developments through, these new and innovative, and some of them are not. Condominiums have been around for a long time, but there are other innovative ideas where you can have ownership, established in these, developments that are not, single family. All right, so it looks like we've gotten the people voting there. So that wraps up the new, policy ideas, and then I will, turn it back over, to the team.
Eunice, I saw that we had a comment saying that, or asking why maybe prioritizing ownership over renting would be desirable. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I'm not sure that the city's taking a position that ownership is better than renting, but I think that we've heard throughout the community that there's a desire to have both. And particularly, we've heard from some of our communities of color that home ownership is something that is desired, and opportunities for those communities to buy a home. And so it's reflecting both what we've heard from the community. But I wouldn't say that the city is saying that owners better than renters, or ownership is better than renting. There are some comments here in the chat that ownership ensures long-term affordability. I think that is true. So Austin, do you want to move on real quick? I just want to make sure we don't run out of time. So this was going to be our opportunity to, if you have any new ideas that we haven't talked about, as Austin said really early in this presentation, that the questions that we asked today and the policy ideas are very, very small sample of the long lists of other ideas that we have both heard from the community and have researched in other cities. So if you want to check those out on our project website, I'm happy to drop those in the link when I'm done talking. And then we have a survey online as well that gets to these policy ideas. And so you're welcome to participate in that as well. Austin?
So how do I comment on some of the existing policies?
You can either fill out the survey, which is on the project website, and I'll get that link right now, or you can always email me. My email information is going to pop up in 2 seconds, Nate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we're doing additional outreach on these policies, not just through these meetings, but also through numerous meetings throughout the community with different community organizations in our survey. And we will then be working to revise all of our policies and presenting those back to the community. Ultimately, our goal is to update the comprehensive plan, hopefully by the end of the year, with all of these new policies. So this is a link to the project website. And so this is just kind of a clip of what you'll see where you can click on the policy survey link. It's in English and in Spanish. And then I just wanted to touch really quick on, so policies is one section of work that we're doing right now, but at the same time, we're also working to put together a new interactive map. I know there's a lot of interest in the community about zoning and what zoning is going to look like in the future under our proposals. So we plan to release that interactive map hopefully this month. We're working on it, and you'll be able to drop comments in and say, did we get it right or not? And then the third thing we're doing is we have meetings coming up this spring with the zoning subcommittee of the City Council and the Planning Commission. And their task really is to focus on 6 different zoning options that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so we presented those ideas pretty quickly at the council meeting back in March. And so now there's a subcommittee that's been formed. And once we have those meetings scheduled, we will release that information. The public will be invited to those and can comment. So there's a lot going on, but depending on kind of where your interest is, you can plug into zoning map or the subcommittee or keep coming to our policy meetings. That would be great. And this is our project website, and here's my information. Feel free to call me or email me anytime. If it's a question that I can't answer, as you can see tonight, there's a lot of expertise in the city, and I'm very thankful for all the people that are helping on this project. And just really quickly, if there's a community organization or a neighborhood association or a business organization that you are part of and you'd like us to come and talk directly to that organization, we are happy to do that. So feel free to just give me a call or email me and we will be there. So if there's any last comments or questions, this is the time.
Eunice, in the chat, I offered a new policy.
Okay. Now let me scroll up. Hold on. I think I may have missed it. To preserve housing stock. Oh dear, I got to scroll down. To preserve housing stock for residents, short-term rentals in residential zones will be limited to owner-renter occupied dwellings. Limited to. Can you explain that, Ross, real quick?
What did you ask me to do?
Can you clarify that real quick? The comment?
Well, would be limited to owner occupied dwellings, but the owner/renter means, whether it's owned or rented by a resident, a permanent resident, that only short-term rentals can be in dwellings, owned or rented by someone already living there. In other words, in our existing code, these are called accessory short-term rentals, as opposed to what's just called short-term rental, when a whole house, a whole apartment is taken out of housing stock and is used totally for short-term rentals.
Okay. And so you're saying your preference would be to limit it to where the owner lives on the property.
Correct.
In residential zones. Okay.
Recognizing that the property could be rented too. It doesn't just have to be
Yes.
owner.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Eunice, this is Steve. Thank you to you and Bryce. It's I had a couple pointed questions, but I mean, this is hard work because there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think the need for new policy is important, and I champion what both of you are doing and applaud you for reaching out. And Eunice has agreed to come to the West Salem Neighborhood Association, so she is readily available. And then just finally, real quick, how do we deal with the multifamily inventory between now and when the map gets finalized? For example, we have a couple projects that we've encouraged with some developers. One's a affordable veterans housing association housing project, and we have another couple where they're going to convert residential agriculture to multifamily. Do we get to count that as part of our multifamily inventory in the new map, or does it just go into nowhere land because it's not in the old map? So does that get included in our multifamily inventory in the future?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things we hope to do is meet that projected need for multifamily housing when we adopt the comprehensive plan. And so we would look at all the changes that we propose to make on the map in terms of more multifamily land, as well as look again at some of the assumptions that went into, for example, the densities or redevelopment. So we will be kind of looking broadly once everything's a little bit more set to then say, yes, we do think we're going to meet our housing needs out 20 years. And that's actually a finding that we have to make when we go through adoption process if we want to adopt the housing needs analysis in particular.
So we get to count it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That was a long-winded answer.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So next week, I think the topic is economic development and employment. And Annie Gorski from Urban Development will be here, as well as others. So stay tuned for that. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Eunice. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, Shelley, Jessica, Bryce, Austin. Great job.
Yeah, thanks, Eunice.
You
Good
guys
job,
were
everybody.
awesome.